Tonight on PrimeTime Politics, an address from the Prime Minister. Coming up, we'll break down what we heard from Carney this evening, making an argument for his upcoming budget and an economic path he would like to see Canada follow. Also,
the opposition parties are, in my view, being very, very cavalier about the country's future.
If the Prime Minister fails to get his budget passed, an election would be triggered. But what do the polls say? Is there any advantage for any party to pull the plug on this Parliament? Polls analyst Éric Grenier will fill us in. And what is Canada's EV future if ventures like the BrightDrop EV are no longer seen as viable? This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, we're now just 2 weeks away from the federal government's first budget, and while we do not know what will be in that document yet, we did hear from the Prime Minister this evening, Carney, setting the stage by outlining the challenges he sees this country facing, some of the strategies he believes Canada needs to pursue, all to meet what he also believes is an extraordinary moment in this country's history.
We used to build things in this country. We can build again. We used to explore this country. We can chart new courses again. We used to take big, bold risks in this country. It is time to swing for the fences again. We learned a little lesson about swinging for the fences a couple nights ago, as I recall. And this is what the upcoming budget will be about: building, taking control, and winning. We will make generational investments with a plan to protect our communities, our borders, our way of life. We will build a stronger economy where everyone has a chance to get ahead. And we will empower Canadians with new opportunities, better careers, and a lower cost of living.
Again, the Prime Minister from earlier this evening speaking at the University of Ottawa. And joining us right now are Marci, Surkes, former Liberal Executive Director of Policy and Cabinet Affairs in the PMO, current Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director at Compass Rose, and with her, Stephanie Taylor, parliamentary reporter for The National Post. Hello to both of you.
Hey, Michael.
So listen, I'm going to begin just the significance of this moment in that it is very rare for a Prime Minister to deliver a primetime speech. You know, Jean Chrétien did it after 9/11, for example. So here we have this Prime Minister speaking at the University of Ottawa tonight. Talk to us about the significance of that, Marci.
You're right, Michael. I mean, this is much more of an American-style address to the nation, even complete at the end with almost a John F. Kennedy-like call to action for younger people. Ask not what you can do for your country. I mean, he really took a playbook out of the Oval Office, which is, you know, a fascinating image in and of itself, given the negotiations with the United States, the fixation of this country right now with what is happening with the Trump administration. So, strategically speaking, an interesting opportunity to table set. Mr. Carney clearly wanted to get the attention on himself for a moment. A lot of what we heard tonight was almost like a Netflix, almost like a Netflix episode recap. It was a lot of the greatest hits from the last number of weeks, re-emphasizing, underscoring, valuing what the government has been doing to date, but setting the stage for the budget in very clear-eyed terms. He was not sugarcoating what is confronting us as a nation. And I think the decision to go tonight is also an attempt to put him in the window. As we all know, he's traveling. He'll be leaving soon for 9 days, 9 long days in advance of a budget. He'll be missing in action. This ensures he's on everybody's mind tonight, tomorrow in the news cycles. So quite an interesting, smart, unique strategic play from the Prime Minister.
Okay, we'll dig into that. But Stephanie, you know, I'll pick up on something that Marci was saying that was almost his greatest hits of you know, in the last episode was, because we've been following the Prime Minister. We've traveled with the Prime Minister throughout the summer and the early part of this fall. And a lot of it seemed to be a repetition of what we have heard time and again. Perhaps not every Canadian, but certainly those in the press gallery who have followed the PMO have heard this before.
It's giving me a lot of election feelings again, and I think this speaks to how the Prime Minister wants Canadians to see him. We saw during the election that in this time of economic and other anxiety, Canadians look to him as someone that they could trust. And I think him appearing tonight, trying to set the stage and manage expectations about what might be in the budget, shows that he wants Canadians to still feel that trust towards him. We don't know what's going to be in this document. We've heard a little bit of tidbits tonight that it's going to be a significant document, and he's basically asking Canadians to continue to trust me, continue to put your trust in me, which I think is an interesting staging in terms of how he wants Canadians to continue to view him. And I think in terms of the managing expectations, he's having to manage expectations on some pretty big fronts, right? How much is he going to spend? How much is he going to cut? How is he going to continue to manage the relationship with the U.S.? We still don't have this long-coveted trade deal. The opposition parties are continuing to kind of ask and intensify their questioning. But we think back to the election, there was this joke, these kind of big daddy vibes. I think that the Prime Minister is almost like leaning into that a little bit of essentially saying, trust me, we're in this together. I promise when things are going to be hard, I'm going to tell you they're going to be hard.
Yeah, and to that, I will say what's interesting is that we heard here are the world and the challenges as Mark Carney sees it, and he sets up this hinge moment. That's not a word he used this evening, but he's used it in the past. That we're at this hinge moment as a country. He did not talk about dollar figures. He did not talk about a deficit, which we know is going to be into the tens of billions of dollars. And it's almost like and talk to us about the strategy of this Marci. Like, I mean, he is basically saying, this is how big the problem is. And down the road, not far down the road, you're going to hear how much it's going to cost to deal with this problem. But tonight was about setting the scene of how big the problem is.
Well, the rule number one of politics is managing expectations. So that is a lot of what we saw tonight. He is ensuring that everyone understands the diagnosis here and that the medicine is not going to taste great. So that is the point of setting the table tonight with this kind of address, and we'll see him likely continuing to use the similar kind of narrative leading into the budget. Fascinating paradigm that the government has set up, the Prime Minister in particular, talking about this government in two terms that almost seem like oxymoronic when you put them together, that it is both going to be a budget that demonstrates restraint and at the same time investment. Oftentimes we think of a budget as being either an investment document or an austerity document, but the two combined is quite unique, and I think it actually speaks to this moment. So he is trying to frame things in that way with a very clear emphasis on the exciting, ambitious nature of the budget, the exciting moment we have, opportunity to build, but also not mincing words about the fact that it is going to cost a lot, and Canadians need to be ready for this pain pill.
Yeah, and I'm quickly running out of time here, but I want to bring in the fact that he did say that we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months. It will take some sacrifices and some time, which says it's going to be a huge communications challenge for this government to sell Canadians on this budget stuff.
Sacrifices is a big word that stuck out to me, evoking the rethinking of Canada Post, the fact that they're kind of pulling the plug in terms of how that Crown Corporation is operating, him saying there are things that we love to do that we're not going to be able to do as much of. I mean, what are those other things that Canadians love that they're not going to be able to do as much of in this budget? And I think one of the challenges the Prime Minister has found himself in is he's talking about these large, long-term, multi-generational investments. But Canadians, what they're telling him in the polls is that they're feeling the pinch of affordability today. That's like an immediate today concern. So how is he going to try and bridge that gap? And it's fine and dandy to put a speech like this and to put the expectations in the window. But once that budget document comes down and people start to actually see what the dollar figures and numbers are, and you get to see Canadians' reaction, I'll be very interested to see how the Prime Minister and his team continue to manage this.
Well, I will say that we're 2 weeks away from the federal budget, and the scuttlebutt already in Ottawa is that they needed to signal something in order to prepare the country. So this seems like a big first step in that preparation. We'll keep following it in the days to follow, but for this evening, Marci, Steph, thank you for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, without a doubt, the government's first budget will be top of mind for the next 2 weeks here in Ottawa. And if the budget does not pass, well, that would trigger another election, something the government House leader says is a real possibility. Take a listen right now to Stephen McKinnon.
Look, we do not think an election is necessary. We have a minority parliament, but we do believe we have a mandate along the lines of my previous answer. If there has to be an election, we will confidently take our plan to the people. But we don't think an election is necessary. And
you think you can win one?
And as I said yesterday, the opposition parties are, in my view, being very, very cavalier about the country's...
Okay, so the government House Leader uses the word cavalier, but is there any incentive for any party to pull the plug on this parliament? To talk about this, we're now joined by polls analyst Éric Grenier, the founder and the writer of The Writ. Hello, Éric.
Hi.
So listen, and I don't have to say this to you, but any party that wants to vote this government down, they would have to have this feeling that they could gain more seats in another vote. So I wonder what the polls are telling you, because you did ask us to prepare two results in particular. I'm going to ask the control room to call it up right now. So there you have it, Léger to the left, Abacus to the right. Walk us through these polls, Éric, and what they're telling you.
Yeah, these are seat projections based on polls that we've seen recently from Abacus Data and Léger. And I do think that these two sets of polls actually do tell the story, the two kinds of narratives we're seeing from the polls. Abacus had the poll out just a few days ago, had the Conservatives at 41%, the Liberals at 40%, and the NDP at 8%. Léger had a poll a few weeks before that, had the Liberals with a 6-point lead over the Conservatives. And that is pretty much the kind of numbers we've seen from polls over the last 2 months, either a neck-and-neck race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, or either a small lead for the Liberals. In the case of the small lead for the Liberals, you get a majority government, like those seat projection shows, where the Liberals could get the majority that they were missing out on election night. And with the very close race, the kind of numbers that we've seen, especially at the regional level, really suggest it would be 50-50. The seat projection I had there had 150 seats apiece for the Liberals and the Conservatives. In all likelihood, one of them would end up with one or two more seats than the other. But it does show that there are two different scenarios that are being played out here, I think, in a lot of parties' minds. One is, could the Liberals get a majority? And the other is, could it end up being as much as a toss-up election between the Conservatives and the Liberals?
Yeah, so two possible narratives, nothing really guaranteed if, for example, the Conservatives want to pull the plug. But I also do wonder here, Éric, because the Conservative leader has been on the defensive this week. He's been asked questions about that interview he gave, that Pierre Poilievre gave, in which he described the RCMP leadership as despicable, and he accused the RCMP of covering up for Justin Trudeau. Is there any way of knowing if those comments and the fallout from it will affect the numbers that you've been looking at?
Well, I think that it's not going to impact his ability to pass the leadership review in January. Every indication is that Conservative voters, and we can expect that as well if party members, are very pleased with Pierre Poilievre. But will it have a broader impact on the support for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives? We've seen lots of criticisms about how statements like this don't seem to put him as a PM in waiting. They're not the kind of things that are going to appeal to those swing voters that the Conservatives need to win the next election. So we'll be watching to see over the next little while if some of the discontent we've heard over the last little while is going to impact his polling numbers, and that indirectly could end up impacting his leadership if there is more concern within the Conservative Party, whether or not they like him, whether they think he can actually win the next election.
Yeah, and that is, of course, becomes part of the calculus that Conservatives would have to consider whether or not they wanted to vote down this government. Let's also talk about the Bloc Québécois, though, because yes, the Conservatives are the official opposition, but for the Liberals, they need Quebec. It's their path to government, and we've heard from Yves-François Blanchet. He has already said that he's going to vote against the budget even before seeing it. So when you look at the same two polls, is there any motivation for the BQ to pull the plug on this parliament?
Well, yes and no. They had 22 seats in the last election, and with the kind of numbers we've seen, the Bloc is up a little bit in Quebec, the Liberals are down a little bit. They could expect to win 30, 31 seats, maybe replicate the results from the 2019 and 2021 elections. But in one of those scenarios, they hold the balance of power. In the other of those scenarios, they just have a few more seats with a Liberal majority government. And I think that is one of the things that the Bloc has to take into consideration. What can they get out of the government right now? Because if there is an election, yeah, the Bloc might be able to win a few more seats. Doesn't necessarily mean that they would have any more influence in a parliament after that. So that is a choice they're going to have to make. Also a big choice, there is a provincial election in Quebec next year. So if the Bloc doesn't go in 2025, could they go in 2026, because I think that they would want to make sure they're not getting in the way of the Parti Québécois winning that election next year.
And talk to us a bit about the NDP, because, you know, anecdotally, I'll tell you, I've spoken to some New Democrats here in Ottawa. They talk about the borrowed vote that essentially delivered a victory to the Carney Liberals, and they believe that those votes would come back to the NDP if an election were held. Can you say anything about that?
Well, that is certainly something that could happen, but we haven't seen it happen in the polls. There have been a couple surveys now and then that'll have the NDP at 12%, something like that, but most of them still show them in the low single, or the mid single digits, I should say. So there is the chance that if there wasn't another election, they could get the 12 seats that they need for official party status in the House of Commons. There's also a chance that they end up with the same number of seats or even fewer. And the NDP really can't afford another bad election, another election where they have to spend resources on a campaign where they don't get a lot of the reimbursements back. So it's possible the NDP could find themselves with 12, 15 seats in a new election. But again, could the party afford another catastrophe like the last election? And just like the Bloc, could they end up losing the balance of power that they currently have?
Okay, so then when you hear the government House leader expressing concerns about getting this budget passed, how real, again, based on the numbers you're looking at, how real is that concern right now, Éric?
It must be real enough, because we see that Mark Carney has met with a couple of the leaders today. He's making that speech. There's clearly a concern that the budget might not get passed, or that they need to make sure that they have the parties on board to at least abstain. One of them could abstain and also avoid an election. But at the same time, there's not really a lot of incentive for anybody to go to the polls. Is there a chance that any of those parties could end up in a better position? Yes. Is there a chance that they could end up in a worse position? Yes. And it's really 50-50. So we're not in a scenario like in the fall of 2024, where there was a huge incentive for the Conservatives, for the Bloc to go to a campaign because of how weak the Liberals were. Right now, Liberals could get a majority, they could get defeated. The Conservatives could win an election, they could end up in the exact same position they are right now. So when you look at those kind of calculations, not a lot of incentives for parties to go to the polls now. Maybe there'll be incentives to go later.
Okay, maybe as soon as next week, who knows? We'll bug you again. Éric Grenier, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.
To Canada's EV future now, in yesterday's announcement that ended production of the GM BrightDrop in Ingersoll, Ontario. At one time, it was touted as the sustainable way to transform urban delivery. And both Ottawa and Ontario invested about $1 billion to transform the plant that made the BrightDrop. But like so many attempts to create an EV industrial footprint in this country, it failed. Well, let's talk about Canada's EV future. Hadrian Mertins-Kirkwood is a senior researcher at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. His work focuses on Canada's shift towards a zero carbon emission economy. Hadrian, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
So, even before the cancellation of BrightDrop yesterday, there have been questions about the viability of Canada's EV future. Because, before that we had Quebec losing hundreds of millions of dollars when Northvolt went bankrupt. We saw the plans to expand a plant in Encore for EV batteries essentially stopped. Are you concerned that Canada's EV future is over just as it begins?
A little bit, yeah. The thing is, there are actually two EV futures we're talking about, right? We're talking about us as consumers buying electric vehicles, driving electric vehicles, and then we're talking about Canada being an industrial producer of electric vehicles. So there's actually two different futures. I think the transition to us as consumers driving EVs, eventually replacing all the internal combustion engines on the road, that's pretty much inevitable. I mean, we can argue about the timeline, whether that's 5 years or 30 years, but we're headed in that direction for sure. Whether those vehicles are built in Canada or not, that's very uncertain. And I think a lot of these developments in the past couple of years have been quite concerning on that front.
Okay, how do you turn things around, though? Because, that certainly is the future identified by the previous Liberal government. That is the future that's been identified by unions, by industry before Donald Trump's election. He has now canceled the EV mandate in the United States. In this country, this government has now suspended the EV mandate for 2026. How do you turn things around if the intent, take the consumer side out of it, but as a creation of an industrial policy for this country, how do you turn it around?
It's really hard, and that's because we're extremely dependent on foreign investment when it comes to EV manufacturing. We don't have a big auto producer in Canada. We have some parts producers that are Canadian-owned, but for the most part, we assemble vehicles that are American vehicles or Japanese vehicles, and then we export those vehicles. But if those companies want to go elsewhere, all we can really do, and what governments have been doing for decades, is try and incentivize them to stay, offer tax breaks, offer subsidies. But if another country makes a better offer or wields a bigger stick, then we don't have a lot of choice, and that puts us in a really difficult position. It doesn't mean we don't have strengths. We do have a very skilled workforce that is relevant. We do have relatively low energy inputs, for example, energy costs, which is important when we're talking about manufacturing. So there are opportunities perhaps, and we can talk more about batteries as an opportunity. But the bottom line is this is not something that is simple to solve, and it's not something that the Canadian industry or the Canadian government can just unilaterally fix. Okay,
not unilaterally, although we do have a government that is very much interested in national projects. And I know that one project that's been put forward to the government, perhaps in more informal channels, is investing in a Canadian-made EV vehicle, owned, created, made here in Canada. What's your thought on that?
I think it's a really exciting idea. It checks a lot of boxes in terms of an industrial strategy, because it's not only about making money in the short term, because I think it'd be hard to make a lot of money in the short term on that project. But you'd build out a lot of capacity. You'd build out the supply chain. You'd build out this sort of R&D infrastructure around it. Could have a lot of spin-off benefits. So I think it's an interesting idea and something worth considering. But as a kind of economically viable replacement for the current industry, I don't think it's there. Ultimately, we sell a lot of our cars internationally. Most of the cars we make, we sell to the U.S., and then we buy cars from the U.S. And to think that a fully Canadian-made EV could be viable without also having significant market access around the world, we just couldn't sell enough in Canada alone. So we really do need to be connected to the global auto market there in that way.
It sounds like more than pessimism, you've actually almost closed the door on an EV future for this country.
I don't think so. I just think we need to be realistic, and I think we need to be strategic. I think the era of us being kind of a branch plant exclusively for mostly American companies, I don't know that that's the future. I don't think we should give up on it. We need to fight to protect these factories, protect these workers, absolutely. But I like the direction we've been moving in terms of looking up the supply chain. Can we be producing electric vehicle batteries in Canada? And then that becomes a really useful commodity. We can sell those anywhere. We don't have to necessarily build the cars in Canada. If we can, we should, but we should be thinking about where we can make a really kind of strategic investments for the long term.
Okay, when you say that, I think about Ontario's Ring of Fire. Of course, this vast reserve of critical minerals, but we're still years away from any road reaching it, which of course means then we are years away from any meaningful production of those critical minerals. How does an investment in that now make economic sense, or is it just hoping that one day it will pay off in the future?
Yeah, well, it's not only those logistical issues. Of course, there's real issues around Indigenous rights and title that we need to be respectful of. But I think you raise a good point, which is this stuff's years in the future, and that's exactly what governments are supposed to be doing. It's thinking about how can we have a strong economy, a sustainable, inclusive economy in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years. Government's the only one who can do that. The private sector is not making those considerations. Yeah, they want to be profitable, but they want to be profitable now. And it may be the case that when it comes to investing in this critical mineral supply chain, investing in, for example, battery manufacturing, it is a long game, and we're going to need government to be involved because it's not going to be profitable in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So the government has, including today, talked about a sustainable environmental policy. What do you want to see out of that?
I mean, the first thing is that it is a genuine environmental policy, and we're seeing a lot of backsliding right now with the federal government, entertaining a lot of policies, infrastructure around liquefied natural gas, carbon capture that aren't truly compatible with the zero carbon economy. So let's be clear about what environmentally friendly means. And then thinking big picture that it's, yes, we need to be driving more electric vehicles, but we also need more public transit. We need more active transportation. We need cities where people can live close to where they work. So there's a lot of other angles to come at this transportation and decarbonization angle that provides a lot of opportunities, plays to some of Canada's strengths without getting totally hung up on just replacing cars.
Okay, Hadrian, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.